It started with a stench. One moment, Karen and her campers were roasting marshmallows on my pasture. The next, a foul tide of sewage came rushing across the field. Tents collapsed under the weight of the flood, campfires hissed out, and shrieks filled the air as families scrambled to save their sleeping bags and picnic coolers. Kids were crying, adults slipping in the muck, and Karen stood there shrieking at me, her designer sneakers sinking deeper into the brown mess. What they thought was a public campsite had turned into the worst summer nightmare anyone could imagine. And as I watched the chaos unfold, I couldn't help but smirk. This wasn't an accident, it was justice. You see, this land wasn't theirs to take. It was my family's farm, passed down for generations, and Karen's arrogance had finally met the one boundary she couldn't bulldoze. Before I tell you how it all began, let me ask you, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing this HOA drama reach every corner of the world. When the sewage flood swallowed Karen's so-called public campsite, that was the chaotic climax of months of disrespect. But before you can understand why I went to such lengths, you need to know what my land means to me and what it felt like watching it slowly stolen by people who had no right to step foot on it. I was born on that farm. My earliest memories are of waking up to the sound of roosters, running barefoot through dew-covered grass, and following my father around while he fixed fences or tinkered with the old irrigation pump. The soil itself felt alive under my feet. My grandfather carved these pastures out of wild brush after World War II, hauling stone by hand to build the walls that still stand today. To outsiders, it might just look like a few dozen acres of green fields and a weather-worn red barn. But to me, every inch of it is a chapter of family history. Life on the farm wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Cows to milk, chickens to feed hay, to cut day in and day out. And there's a certain dignity in that rhythm. The sweat on your brow feels different when it soaks into land that's yours, earned, cared for, and passed down. The farm was my sanctuary. My father used to say, "A man's land is like his skin. When someone trespasses you, feel it in your bones." He wasn't wrong. So imagine my fury when the HOA, an organization that was supposed to protect property values, started creeping closer year by year. At first it was subtle. They paved a road a little too far past the designated boundary. They installed a sign advertising community walking trails right at the edge of my fence line. I let it slide, thinking maybe it was just sloppy planning. After all, who in their right mind would think farmland belonged to a suburban association? Then came Karen. You've probably heard me talk about her before. Blonde bob, pastel cardigans, and a voice that could peel paint off a barn door. She became HOA president, not because she was smart or kind, but because she was loud enough to make everyone else back down. If there's one thing Karen loved more than controlling her own yard, it was controlling everyone else's. She started showing up at the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, muttering about unused land. To her, the fact that I didn't build tennis courts or luxury gazebos meant my farm was being wasted. She once told me, dead serious, "Imagine the property value boost if this could be a recreational zone." I laughed in her face, thinking it was a bad joke, but she wasn't joking. The HOA neighborhood sat right beyond my southern fence line. Neat rows of identical houses, manicured lawns, neighbors gossiping over hedges, the whole Stepford package. To them, my wide-open pastures were an eyesore, a blank canvas begging for community projects. But to me, they were the last patch of peace in a world choking on conformity. At first, my philosophy was simple: live and let live. I didn't bother them about their tacky garden gnomes or their obsession with leaf blowers at 7 in the morning. In return, I expected them to leave me and my land alone. That's how neighbors are supposed to work, right? Respect each other's boundaries. But Karen wasn't built that way. Respect wasn't in her vocabulary. To her, boundaries were merely suggestions. She thrived on testing people's patience until they either bent or broke. And when she realized I wasn't bending, she decided to break me. I'll never forget the first day I noticed campers on my field. I came out with a mug of coffee in hand, ready to do my morning chores, and froze. There, right in the middle of my pasture, was a neon green tent with a family of 4 cooking sausages on a portable stove. I thought maybe they'd gotten lost or were confused about the county park being 2 miles down the road. But when I asked what they were doing, they simply smiled and said, "Karen told us this was the new community campsite." Community campsite. The words burned into my ears like acid. I drove straight to Karen's house that afternoon, ready to demand an explanation. She greeted me at the door with that smug smile, sipping sparkling water like a queen holding court. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, waving her manicured hand. "It's just a little camping. The neighborhood doesn't have space, and your farm is perfect. You should be honored." Honored. as if it was a privilege to have strangers trample my fields, leave trash and light fires yards away from my hay barn. I told her flat out it wasn't happening. My land was private, period. But she leaned in, eyes glittering, and whispered, "You can't stop progress. The HOA has spoken." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with nosy neighbors. I was dealing with a full-on land grab disguised as community spirit. Over the next few weeks, the invasion grew. More tents popped up. Cars parked haphazardly, flattening crops I'd spent months tending. Children chased my chickens like it was some petting zoo, while adults dumped beer cans in the ditch. Every morning I woke up to new damage, new footprints, new insults to the land my family had sweat and bled for. And every time I complained, the campers parroted the same excuse. Karen said it's fine. And there she was, always strutting around with her clipboard, barking orders about where tents should go as if she owned the place. To the campers, she looked like a leader. To me, she looked like a parasite, sucking the life out of everything she touched. I tried to stay calm. I tried to remind myself that decent people eventually see reason. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't decent. She was greedy, manipulative, and shameless. And I could already feel something in me snapping. Because on that farm, I wasn't just a homeowner, I was a guardian, and Karen had just declared war on my sanctuary. If you think the sight of strangers camping on my land was bad, wait until you hear how the entire disaster was officially introduced. See, Karen didn't just pull the idea out of thin air and hope for the best. No, she had an entire performance planned. A classic HOA ambush during one of their monthly meetings. And like every scheme she dreamed up, it came wrapped in pastel colors, fake smiles, and a thick layer of self-righteousness. I still remember walking into that meeting. I wasn't an HOA member, thank God, but since my farm bordered their subdivision, I made it my business to attend once in a while just to keep an eye on what they were plotting. Normally, it was boring stuff, arguments about mailbox heights, complaints about lawn decorations, votes on pool maintenance, the usual Karen fodder. But that night, the air felt different. Karen was glowing with smug excitement, pacing in front of the board like a teacher about to reveal the year's biggest project. She tapped her clipboard against the podium and cleared her throat dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen, she began our community, has thrived because of shared values. But one thing we've been missing is shared experiences." She paused, letting her words hang heavy, like she was proposing the cure for cancer. "I propose the establishment of a community campsite, a place where families can bond with nature, where children can learn about the outdoors, and where we as neighbors can grow even closer together." Applause broke out. Honest-to-God applause. I nearly choked on the stale cookie I'd grabbed from the snack table. My jaw tightened when I realized the board members, the very people who were supposed to oversee finances and property boundaries, were nodding along like Karen had just reinvented sliced bread. Then came the kicker. Karen turned, pointed her pen straight at a map of the neighborhood pinned to the wall, and drew a bright red circle over my farm. And the perfect location, she declared, is right here. Every eye in the room swiveled toward me. I raised my hand. "Excuse me, that's my land. My private farm. You can't just," Karen cut me off with a sharp laugh. "Oh, don't be so territorial. Property lines are flexible, and besides, your land is practically unused. You don't host events, you don't build facilities, you don't even let kids run around. Why should all that space sit empty while our community suffers from a lack of recreational areas?" Her voice dripped with fake sympathy like she was scolding a selfish child. I wanted to shout because it's mine, that's why, but I held my tongue, waiting to hear how deep this rabbit hole went. Karen flipped through a stack of papers and waved them proudly. "We've already run surveys. Families are desperate for a safe, fun, local option for camping. Think of the children, think of the property values. A campsite will make this neighborhood the envy of the entire county." The crowd murmured in approval. A few parents clapped harder, imagining s'mores and sing-alongs. One man even whispered, "That would save us money on vacations." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not one person was questioning whether they had the right to use my farm. They were only asking how quickly they could set up their tents. I stood up, slammed my palm on the table, and said, "You can't just take my land because you're too cheap to book a campground. This farm has been in my family for generations. It's not for sale, not for lease, and certainly not for a bunch of HOA busybodies with a marshmallow addiction." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen narrowed her eyes. Now. No need for hostility," she purred, though the venom in her tone was obvious. "We're not taking your land. We're simply repurposing it. Think of it as doing your civic duty. Don't you want to give back to the community? Give back. They hadn't given me a single thing unless you count headaches and trespassers." Karen's sycophants piped up next. One board member, a guy whose lawn Karen once praised in the newsletter, nodded vigorously. It's just a field, isn't it? You barely use it. Why not let the neighborhood benefit? Another woman chimed in. I mean, what harm could it do? Kids need space to play. What harm could it do? I imagined wildfires from untended campfires, trash littering my fields, livestock spooked by shouting kids, and worst of all, the erosion of my family's legacy. But these people weren't thinking about consequences. They were hypnotized by Karen's sales pitch, too afraid or too lazy to question her. And then Karen delivered the line that made my blood boil. If he refuses, we'll just classify it as community property. After all, isn't the spirit of the HOA to share and uplift everyone? It's not like one man should be able to hoard all that land when so many could enjoy it. Hoard. That was the word she used. As if working dawn to dusk to maintain fences, feed animals, and keep weeds at bay was some form of selfishness. As if my sweat and my family's sacrifice were nothing but obstacles in her quest for HOA glory. I left that meeting with my fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached. The sound of applause still rang in my ears, each clap a nail in the coffin of reason. They didn't see me as a neighbor anymore. To them, I was just a stubborn old farmer standing in the way of their fun. That was when I realized Karen wasn't just testing boundaries, she was rewriting them. And if I didn't push back hard, I was about to lose everything my family had built. The next day, the campsite invasion escalated. Flyers appeared in mailboxes announcing the grand opening of the HOA family campgrounds. Families strolled onto my fields with picnic baskets, coolers, and inflatable mattresses. Karen strutted around like a park ranger, waving her clipboard and assigning tent spaces. And all the while, she kept smiling at me, as if daring me to stop her. Well, I didn't stop her that day. Not yet. Because while she was busy planning her campsite, I was planning something else entirely. Something she wouldn't see coming until it was too late. The day after Karen's little presentation, my farm transformed from a sanctuary into a circus. I woke up early as always, expecting to tend the animals and fix a section of fence I'd been meaning to repair. Instead, I opened the door and found a caravan of SUVs parked haphazardly along my gravel driveway. Beyond them, in my pasture, neon-colored tents were sprouting like weeds after a spring rain. At first, I thought maybe I was dreaming. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and took another sip of coffee. But no, the sight didn't change. Families were hammering stakes into the soil. Kids were chasing each other with water guns trampling down my carefully cut hay. One man was unloading a full-size gas grill from the back of his truck, as if my land had magically turned into a KOA campground overnight. The stench of lighter fluid hit me before I even stepped off my porch. Someone had already started a fire pit using scrap wood they'd found near my barn. Sparks flew dangerously close to the dry grass, and my heart skipped a beat thinking about how easily the whole field could ignite. I stormed across the yard shouting, "What the hell do you people think you're doing?" A woman in yoga pants and a sun visor smiled at me as if I'd just asked about the weather. "Oh hi," Karen said, "it's fine. We're setting up for the first official HOA family campout." "Isn't this wonderful, wonderful?" My voice cracked. "You're trespassing on private property. This isn't a campsite, it's my farm," she shrugged, completely unfazed. Karen told us it was community land now. She even assigned us our spots. "You're welcome to join the barbecue later." Join the barbecue. On my own pasture, I swear my blood pressure spiked 20 points right then. By noon, the invasion had grown. Cars lined the road, blocking my access to the equipment shed. Teenagers played loud music from a portable speaker, the bass thumping through my barn walls. Two boys thought it would be funny to chase my chickens, sending feathers flying. And when I asked one man to move his car off my alfalfa field, he smirked and said, "Relax, dude." Karen cleared it. Karen cleared it, as if her signature suddenly erased property deeds and family legacies. I finally spotted her around mid-afternoon. She was marching up and down the rows of tents like a camp director, barking orders through a little whistle she must have bought just for the occasion. Clipboard in one hand, iced latte in the other, she looked like she was auditioning for the role of dictator of the outdoors. When she saw me, she didn't even flinch. In fact, she smiled as if we were partners in this madness. "Isn't it beautiful?" she cooed, waving her hand at the chaos. Families, bonding, children, laughing, property values soaring. It's everything I dreamed. I clenched my fists. It's everything I feared. "This is private property, Karen. You can't just turn it into your personal campground." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Private property is such an outdated concept. We're a community. And besides, you weren't using this land. It's practically wasted." "Wasted," I nearly shouted. "This land feeds my animals, grows my crops, and keeps a roof over my head. It's not wasted, it's mine." But Karen wasn't listening. She blew her whistle at a group of kids climbing my fence and shouted, "Careful with the farmer's toys, sweeties." Then she turned back to me and said, "Try to relax. You might even enjoy it if you stop being so selfish." Selfish? That word hit me harder than the rest. According to Karen, standing up for my rights wasn't just inconvenient, it was immoral. She had twisted the narrative so completely that I was now the villain for not letting her neighbors run wild on my land. The campers weren't innocent either. They laughed when I argued with Karen. Some even rolled their eyes, muttering about grumpy old farmers who couldn't share. It was like watching reality warp in real time. The damage piled up quickly. By evening, the ground was littered with plastic cups, candy wrappers, and beer cans. Someone dumped greasy dishwater into my irrigation ditch. A tent stake punctured the hose I used for watering livestock. And when I went to check the barn, I found a pair of kids swinging from the rafters like it was some kind of jungle gym. "Get down from there," I barked, but they just laughed and ran off. Their parents didn't even apologize. One mother just said, "They're kids. Lighten up." By the time the sun set, I was exhausted not from farm work, but from policing trespassers on land that should have been safe. The sight of my pasture glowing with campfires, the sound of my animals restless from the noise, the smell of smoke and spilled beer, it all churned in my stomach like poison. That night, I sat on my porch in the dark fists, clenched around a cold cup of coffee. My farm, my sanctuary, had been reduced to a playground for people who didn't care one bit about the sweat and sacrifice that kept it alive. And worst of all, they thought they were entitled to it. Karen had unleashed the first wave of invasion, and I knew deep down it wouldn't stop here. She wasn't the type to back down. No Karen would push further, demand more until she had complete control. And as I stared out at the flickering fires in my pasture, one thought burned hotter than the embers. If they want a war, they've just started one. By the third day of the so-called community campsite, I'd had enough. My farm looked like a festival ground after a tornado. Patches of grass, trampled flat trash scattered across the field, fence posts broken where kids had decided to explore, and the smell of burned wood clinging to the air. My animals were spooked, my routines were disrupted, and my patience, what little I had left, was hanging by a thread. So I marched straight into the chaos. The morning sun was already beating down, making the scent of spilled beer and garbage unbearable. Families were sprawled across my pasture in lawn chairs, sipping sodas as though they were at some county fair. Children screeched as they swung on ropes tied to my apple trees. Dogs barked, chasing chickens in circles. And there she was, Karen at the center of it all, strutting around in her bright yellow sundress, sunglasses perched on her nose, and that cursed clipboard tucked under her arm. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I stormed up to her and snapped, "This ends today." Karen turned, lowering her shades to peer at me with mock surprise. "Well, good morning to you too, farmer. Isn't it glorious? Look how happy everyone is. You should be proud." "Proud," I barked, "of the trash, the broken fences, the livestock running wild because your circus terrified them. This isn't glorious, it's vandalism." She laughed lightly, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. "You're being dramatic again. This is community spirit, something you clearly don't understand." I stepped closer, voice low but firm. "No, this is trespassing. You've invaded my farm without permission. I want everyone off my land now." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. Then she straightened her shoulders and smirked. "You don't get to decide that anymore. The HOA has spoken. This land benefits the neighborhood and majority rules." I almost lost it. "Majority rules. This isn't a democracy, Karen. This is private property. My deed doesn't magically dissolve because you and your little fan club voted on it." She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Don't be so technical. Property lines can be adjusted for the greater good. Besides, do you really want to be the man who denies children the chance to enjoy the outdoors?" And there it was, her weapon of choice, guilt. Karen loved to twist arguments until she painted herself as a saint and everyone else as heartless. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "You're outnumbered. You're just one man clinging to a field. I have the whole community behind me. Who do you think people will believe, you or us?" Her smugness was gasoline on the fire already burning inside me. I clenched my jaw and forced myself not to shout. Instead, I spoke with icy calm. "Karen, you need to understand something. This land is mine. My family built it, worked it, and bled for it. You set one more foot across this boundary and you'll regret it." She raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," I said flatly. Her laugh rang out loud enough for the campers nearby to hear. They turned to look, some snickering, others shaking their heads as if I were the unreasonable one. Karen seized the moment like the performer she was. "Oh, everyone don't mind him. Our farmer friend here is just having trouble adjusting to progress. He'll come around eventually." I felt every eye on me, mocking, dismissing, invalidating. And I realized Karen was right about one thing. In that moment I was outnumbered. The crowd was hers, not mine. so I turned on my heel and walked away before I did something reckless. But as I retreated to my porch, Karen called after me, "Don't fight it, farmer. The HOA always wins in the end." Her voice carried across the field like nails on a chalkboard. I sat on the porch, steps, fists balled, pulse hammering. I'd confronted her, made my stance crystal clear, and she'd laughed in my face. Worse, she'd humiliated me in front of the very people wrecking my land. That night, as I gathered trash, left by careless campers, I thought about my father's words. A man's land is like his skin. When someone trespasses, you feel it in your bones. Well, my bones ached, and my heart screamed for justice. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was determined. Karen believed she had all the power because she had a crowd, but crowds are fickle. They cheer when things are fun and flee when things go wrong. Karen had built her little empire on the illusion of control, and I decided then and there I would shatter that illusion in a way she would never forget. The confrontation was over. The war had officially begun. The morning after my clash with Karen, I decided I would try one more time to settle this the right way. As satisfying as it might have been to toss every tent and cooler into the road myself, I knew that could backfire. Karen thrived on drama, and she'd spin the story to make me look like the villain. So instead I picked up the phone and called the sheriff's office. "Ma'am," I said as calmly as I could manage, "there are dozens of people trespassing on my farm. They've set up tents, built fires, and they're harassing my livestock. I need officers here now." There was a pause, then the dispatcher sighed. "Is this about the HOA again?" "Yes," I snapped. "They've turned my land into some kind of campsite," another sigh. "We've received multiple calls about it already. Unfortunately, sir, the paperwork they submitted shows some kind of approval for community use. It looks like a civil dispute, not a criminal one. We can't intervene unless someone's in immediate danger." I nearly dropped the phone. "Community use. What paperwork? That's my deeded land. I understand your frustration, but you'll need to handle this through the courts." The courts. Weeks, maybe months of red tape while Karen's campers ran wild on my property every weekend. My blood boiled, but I thanked the dispatcher through clenched teeth and hung up. Fine. If the sheriff wouldn't help, maybe the county office would. I drove down to the courthouse, clutching my land deed like a lifeline. The clerk behind the counter, a young man who looked barely out of college, clicked through his computer with all the urgency of a snail. "Name," he asked. I gave it. He typed. He frowned. "Oh, yeah, I see what's going on here." The HOA submitted an application for a temporary community recreation designation on adjacent land. "Looks like someone signed off on it." My chest tightened. "Adjacent land. That's my land." He shrugged. "I don't make the rules, sir. You'll have to file a formal complaint. But keep in mind, those processes take time. You might want to hire a lawyer." I leaned over the counter, lowering my voice. "Son, do you understand what you're saying? My property has been stolen in broad daylight, and you're telling me to take a number and wait my turn." His eyes darted nervously to the security guard nearby. "Please don't raise your voice, sir. I'm just explaining procedure." Procedure. That word tasted bitter on my tongue. Procedure meant nothing while Karen was hosting barbecues on my pasture. Still, I left with a stack of forms I knew would gather dust in some office long before they made a difference. On the drive home, I called a local lawyer I'd worked with once for a property line dispute. He listened politely, then sighed. "Honestly, I've dealt with your HOA before. They have a knack for bending rules and filing just enough paperwork to muddy the waters. You'd win eventually, but litigation would cost you thousands and drag on for months. Do you really want to spend that much just to prove what's already obvious?" "Yes," I nearly shouted. "It's my land, I get it," he said gently. "But in the meantime, the court won't issue an emergency injunction unless you can prove irreparable harm, property damage, livestock injury, something concrete." I hung up without saying goodbye. Irreparable harm. What did they think trampled crops, spooked animals, and burned pastures were? By the time I pulled into my driveway, the campers were already gathering again, gearing up for another night of family fun. Karen was at the gate handing out flyers for the upcoming neighborhood camping festival, as though she'd been elected mayor of my farm. I stormed over and snatched one from her hand. In bold letters it read, "HOA Family Campground Grand Festival. Music, food, fun all ages. Welcome." And below that, "Location Community Pasture, formerly known as The Farm." Formerly known as The Farm. My stomach twisted. I confronted Karen right there at the gate. "This is fraud. You've falsified documents, lied to your neighbors, and stolen land that doesn't belong to you." She smirked. "Call it what you want. The HOA board approved it. The county stamped it. And the sheriff won't lift a finger. Face it, you've lost." I glared at her, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. "This isn't over. You've crossed a line, Karen, and lines have consequences. She leaned in close, her perfume, cloying, her smile poisonous. The only consequence here is that you're irrelevant. This is bigger than you. You can't fight progress. Progress. That's what she called it. Trampling over a man's life's work, desecrating his heritage, and throwing trash across his fields, all in the name of progress. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the flyers spread out before me. My hands shook not from fear but from fury. I had tried every channel, the sheriff, the county, the courts, even a lawyer, and they all failed me. The system was designed to protect people like Karen, who knew how to manipulate rules and paperwork. It hit me then, if I wanted justice, I couldn't wait for a courtroom. I would have to deliver it myself. The farm had always provided for me, and now it whispered a solution. Beneath those fields ran an old sewage system my grandfather had installed decades ago. It was meant to handle waste from the barn and farmhouse, pumping it underground into a drainage pond. It was crude, but it worked, and it had the potential to do far more than just handle farm runoff. An idea began to take shape. A plan. A way to turn Karen's smug little campsite into the disaster it deserved to be. The legal system had failed me. The HOA had mocked me. But my farm had one last trick to play, and I was ready to use it. The day Karen organized, the so-called neighborhood camping festival, was the day my patience finally snapped in two. From the moment the sun rose, I knew something was wrong. Instead of the usual quiet cluck of my hens and the rustle of wind through the fields, I heard engines rumbling. Not one or two cars, dozens. By the time I walked to the edge of my driveway, the road was clogged with SUVs, minivans, even a rented U-Haul. They spilled into my pasture like ants onto a picnic, unloading tents, coolers, folding chairs, and inflatable mattresses. By mid-morning, my farm no longer looked like farmland. It looked like the state fair had crashed into a landfill. Bright tarps fluttered in the wind. Someone had set up a bounce house on my alfalfa. A portable stage was being assembled for a local band showcase, according to the flyer. Kids ran wild, tearing through my crops, as if the rows of corn were just another playground. And presiding over the madness, as always, was Karen. She wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and a sash across her chest that read Camp Director in glittery letters. A whistle dangled from her neck, which she blew with alarming frequency, barking orders like a general leading her troops. Tents go over there, keep the firewood stacked neatly. Remember, folks, this is our community's land now. Treat it with pride. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't just borrowing my farm, she was erasing me from it. I stood on my porch for a long moment, my hands trembling around my coffee mug. Every instinct screamed at me to march down there, kick every tent pole into the dirt, and drag them out by their ears. But another instinct whispered, wait. Let them dig their hole deeper. The bigger the mess, the harder the fall. By noon, the festival was in full swing. Smoke from barbecues drifted into the sky. Music blared from oversized speakers. Karen stood on the stage, microphone in hand, delivering a speech, dripping with self-importance. Today marks a new chapter in our community's history, she announced, her voice echoing across the pasture. Thanks to the vision of your HOA board and the generosity of our neighborhood, we now have a family campground for all to enjoy. Generosity, my jaw dropped. She was acting as though I had given her the land out of kindness, as though she hadn't stolen it through lies and arrogance. She continued, this isn't just about camping. This is about unity, about creating memories, about proving that when neighbors come together, anything is possible. The crowd cheered, waving plastic cups in the air. I swear I could feel my ancestors rolling in their graves. I walked through the chaos, noting every detail. Beer cans scattered near the barn. A group of teens carving initials into my apple trees. A tent pitched so close to the chicken coop that feathers coated the ground. One man was dumping the greasy remnants of his grill directly into my irrigation ditch. Each offense was a knife in my ribs. Finally, I found Karen near the stage. She was sipping lemonade, laughing with a cluster of admirers. I marched up and said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, Karen, this stops now. You've gone too far. She turned slowly, her smile sugary, sweet. Oh, hello, farmer. Isn't it magnificent? Look at all these happy families you must be so proud to host. Host, I snapped. I never agreed to this. You're trespassing, destroying my farm, and lying to these people. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen put a hand to her chest, feigning shock. Why, that's a terrible accusation. I've done nothing but organize a safe, wholesome event. Everyone here knows this land was underutilized. I merely gave it purpose. Purpose. My voice shook with fury. This land already had a purpose, feeding my animals, supporting my family, preserving the legacy my grandfather built with his bare hands. And you've reduced it to a trash heap. Karen smirked. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. A few tents, a little music, it's hardly the end of the world." She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Face it, farmer. The HOA has outvoted you. You're just one man, you can't win." That was it, the breaking point. I didn't shout, I didn't threaten, I simply looked her in the eye and said very calmly, "You'll regret this." She laughed loud and shrill. "You're all bark and no bite." Then turning to the crowd, she added, "Don't worry, everyone. Our resident grump is just upset because he doesn't like change. He'll get over it." The crowd roared with laughter, and for the first time in my life I felt truly powerless on my own land. But powerlessness has a way of breeding creativity. That night, after the festival wound down and the campers snored in their tents, I walked the perimeter of the field. My boots sank into the damp soil and my eyes drifted to the old access hatch hidden near the barn. It was rusty, weather-worn, and forgotten by everyone but me. Beneath it ran the farm's old sewage system pipes my grandfather had built decades ago to manage runoff from the barn and outhouse. Crude, yes, but functional. And right now it was the only weapon I had left. As I stood there in the moonlight, the laughter from the campers drifting through the air, the plan crystallized in my mind. Karen thought she had humiliated me, cornered me, beaten me, but she didn't know the land like I did. She didn't know its secrets, its quirks, its power. I whispered to myself, "You want a campsite, Karen, you've got one. But tomorrow you'll find out what kind of campsite it really island." The breaking point had arrived, and I was ready to break back. I won't lie, standing on the edge of that field under a moonlit sky, watching the tents wobble and the campers breathe easy in their smug little dreams. I felt very close to becoming the kind of man my father warned me about. I could have walked up in the dark and burned the tents, knocked over the grills, or poured gasoline into the speakers. Those were angry fantasies, pure satisfying and short-lived. But I wanted more than a tantrum. I wanted a lesson they'd remember long after the mud dried. So I did what farmers do best. I assessed the land. Not with the calculator the HOA would have used, but with the slow, patient eye of someone who's lived with the soil under his fingernails. I walked the rows, traced the fence lines, and listened for the small telling sounds that city folks never hear: the burble of a buried drain, the hollow echo under a low patch of ground, the whisper of water where a ditch ran. The farm had secrets. It always had. My grandfather had hidden things in the earth long before Karen ever learned to micromanage a mailbox design. I thought about consequences. I'm not some reckless villain in a bad B-movie. I have a life to protect, a farm, to preserve animals that depend on me, a name that carries a history. Revenge for revenge's sake doesn't feed a barn cat or fix a broken fence. Whatever I did had to be surgical, symbolic, and irreversible enough to force Karen's supporters to face the cost of their arrogance, but not so destructive that I'd end up in jail, penniless or worse. That moral ledger pulled at me as I plotted. Every step I considered I weighed like a farmer weighing grain too light and nothing changes, too heavy and everything collapses. I thought of public humiliation, of turning her glad-handing into a horror show she couldn't clap away. I imagined the smell of a spoiled picnic and the sight of glittering sashes ruined beyond rescue. I imagined Karen Mascara running in a muddy face, her clipboard soggy and useless. But imagination and action are different beasts. I refused to draw up a blueprint that could teach others how to wreck a campsite. So I kept my plans deliberately vague in my head, a kind of private theater. In practical terms, I did the only legal thing I could do without punching a hole through the law. I prepared evidence. If the sheriff and the county wouldn't help, maybe the court of public opinion would. Social media bites sharper than any judge when it comes to reputations. A few well-timed photos of tents soaked with muck of kids slipping in excrement-tainted puddles of grills, half submerged. Those images would make the HOA look like lunatics in the eyes of the county health department. A press outlet that likes drama would dine on it. And when health inspectors and reporters came running, they wouldn't be checking signatures and meeting minutes. They'd be checking permits, sanitation, and public safety. That only takes minutes to ruin a carefully constructed narrative, so I started gathering proof without crossing any lines. I snapped photos of damaged gutters of beer cans crushed into the soil, of footprints that led to my chicken coop. I recorded short videos of the campers' own behavior, the way they dumped gray water into the ditch, the way fires were left smoldering. I took timestamps. I kept my evidence clean and my conscience clearer by not manufacturing anything. This was documentation, not entrapment. I also reinforced the practical defenses I could lawfully use. I repaired broken fence posts, bolted the gate so a casual stroller couldn't wander in, and posted clear private property signs in spots that even the laziest camper couldn't miss. I called the county health line to report unsanitary conditions without laying out my plan because if inspectors came and declared the site unsafe, Karen's festival would be shut down for legitimate reasons. Bureaucracy is slow, but it's also merciless when it catches up. But the plan wasn't only about paperwork and signs. It was about psychology. Karen thrived on spectacle. The more people applauded her, the more she believed in her invincibility. To topple that, I needed the crowd to turn on her. People abandon leaders who cost them comfort. Make camping uncomfortable enough, make it stinky, unsafe, inconvenient, and the applause will turn to complaints. And once the crowd murmurs against her, the board will slice her down to size. So I started playing a long game. I whispered to a few neighbors who were on the fence, reminding them how quickly property values can sink when a place smells like a poorly run campground. I reached out to an old friend at the local paper, subtly nudging him about a community versus private property human interest angle. I flagged photos to a county inspector's office with a dry note, possible public health violation at temporary campsite requesting evaluation. I didn't instruct anyone to do anything illegal. I just shone a light where Karen had tried to work in the dark. At night, when the farm was silent, I walked the perimeter again and rehearsed the moment I would eventually step out from the shadows. I pictured the scene, Karen mid-prance, glossy microphone in hand, the camera lights catching her smile, and me calmly walking to the microphone, not with a pitchfork, but with proof. I would speak in public, not in anger, and reveal what her community had cost my land. The goal was humiliation through truth, not vengeance through violence. There was a smaller, meaner part of me that craved immediate satisfaction, an urge to douse her glitter sash with something foul so her photo op would be ruined forever. But I let that urge sit on the shelf. There's a difference between being clever and being stupid. Cleverness keeps your boots on and your bank account intact. In the quiet hours before dawn, I dug a little deeper, metaphorically mostly, into the farm's history and the HOA's meeting records. I found gaps, inconsistencies, and a signature that didn't quite match. It wasn't definitive proof of fraud, but it was a breadcrumb trail. I saved copies. I made notes. I planned where to present them. The plan was set in 3 layers: document the abuse force official scrutiny, and stage a public reveal that would strip Karen of her stage. It was surgical, patient, and most importantly, non-violent. If justice was to be had, I wanted it to come down the barrel of truth, not the barrel of a hose. I slept little that night, not because I feared jail, but because I was excited. There is a strange joy in outsmarting someone who thinks they're smarter than you. The farm hummed around me, satisfied at the prospect of being defended. My hands calloused, steady felt ready. Tomorrow things would change. I didn't yet know the exact shape of the fallout, but I knew the first domino had already tipped. The festival was in full ridiculous swing when I decided the time had come. They were laughing, singing, and passing around paper plates like everything in the world was fine. Karen was up on the little makeshift stage, beaming like she'd invented kindness itself. I could see her from the shadow of the tool shed, sash glittering, clipboard dripping with lemonade, and for a moment I felt something cold and precise settle in my chest. This isn't a story about petty vengeance. It's about boundaries, about what happens when people treat your life's work like a backdrop for their weekend. I didn't march onto the stage with a megaphone. I didn't hurl insults or pull down tents by hand. I walked to an old rusted hatch. I alone knew where to find the one that had been hidden behind a stack of forgotten pallets for years. I lifted at the metal, squealing a rusty protest, and for the first time in my life I felt like a man carrying out what his family had taught him: defend what's yours. What happened next was quick and ugly, and I'll spare you the technical nitty-gritty because this isn't a how-to manual. 1 minute the band was playing, the next, the music hit a splutter, and the sound cut out as people turned to see a low, spreading sheen moving across the grass. At first there was confusion. Someone shouted, "Is that water?" and others laughed, thinking it a prank. Then I heard the first real sound of panic, the squeal of nylon stakes ripping through canvas, the awful sucking slurp as the ground gave beneath tent floors. The smell hit like a physical thing, a rolling wall that knocked the breath from your ribs. It was the kind of stench that makes your eyes water and your memory file the moment for later shame and court depositions. People screamed. Children wailed. Chairs toppled as folks scrambled to drag soggy sleeping bags and wet coolers away from the spreading tide. I watched a father grab his little girl and run toward the road, both of them tripping over each other in the mud. Karen saw it too. I still see her face, a portrait of disbelief at first, then fury, then an animal panic that no amount of salon hours could have prepared her for. She clutched her clipboard as if it were a life preserver that could somehow turn the sickening scene back to sunshine. "What is this? Who did this?" She shrieked the words, bubbling up like vomit. Her sunglasses fell off in the muck. The glitter from her sash clung to her eyelashes. For the first time, she was small. People pointed accusations ricocheting faster than a bad rumor. Did someone poison the water? Is this some kind of prank? Call the sheriff? Couples who had been toasting each other a half hour ago now shoved tables aside, looking for their phones, their dignity, a way to make this not be happening. A teenager slipped and landed with a splat that made the nearby parents gasp. His phone screen captured everything, and already I could hear the faint, inevitable ping of posts starting to upload. It was ugly. It was humiliating. It was the exact thing I'd been trying to avoid, only magnified, public, and impossible to explain away with Karen's usual spin. The more I watched the pandemonium unfold, the more I felt that complicated knot inside my chest shift from triumph to something else. Satisfaction, sure. Relief, yes. But threaded through both was a bitter awareness. This was a human mess, not a tidy victory. There were families here who'd come in good faith, looking for a cheap day out. There were children who didn't deserve to be crying in filth. I'd crossed a line, and the echo of that choice began to ring in my ears. Karen's loyalists scattered like roaches. A few of them glared at me from the safety of the road mouths, set hands balled into fists, but the bulk of the crowd moved like water itself, away from the source toward cars, toward clean air. Within minutes, someone had called emergency services. Within an hour, county trucks rolled down the road, the flashing lights a ridiculous clash against the pastoral backdrop. Reporters arrived not long after, because outrage scales well and gets clicks. The cameras loved Karen's ruined makeup. The headlines loved a scandal. I don't blame the press. They do what they do, hunt for spectacle, and feed a hungry world. When the health officers and the sheriff finally corralled a small knot of people and began asking questions, I walked up with the quiet, exhausted look of someone who has done what he thought necessary. They grilled me politely, then suspiciously trying to parse motive from method. I answered with the truth as I was willing to give it. In that moment, I documented the repeated trespasses, the fires left unattended, the dumped trash, and the county's refusal to enforce private property rights. I didn't detail the mechanics. I didn't relish in the how. I told them what I hoped they could see on the ground: unsanitary conditions, danger to children, a festival established under questionable pretenses. My voice was steady because I knew a simple thing: consequences don't need confessions to land. The board scrambled. Karen screamed into her phone, trying to rally a narrative. Sabotage prank, it wasn't us, but the footage was viral before she could compose a press release. Neighbors who had cheered her a week ago now pointed fingers at her leadership, at the way she'd bypassed checks and shoved people onto a man's private land. The same people who'd laughed at my stubbornness were suddenly aggrieved by the chaos she'd wrought. There was a legal aftermath, of course: investigations for public health violations, hearings about permits and temporary land use, and in time a trove of official notices that landed on Karen's door like a rain of small accusing stones. People were mad angry in a way that demanded someone be accountable. The county fined the HOA for the makeshift campsite, citing sanitation concerns and lack of required approvals. The local paper ran exposés about the HOA's paperwork, loose signatures missing, notices a few lines that didn't quite add up. People who had once cheered stood in town meetings and demanded answers. And me, I walked the field in the days that followed, boots squelching, heart heavy. The tents were gone, the bounce house deflated and abandoned like some warped art installation. Volunteers came by neighbors who felt guilt or had been embarrassed or simply hated the idea of anyone getting away with trampling on another man's life, and helped me clean up. We hauled sodden mattresses to the burn pile legally, under proper guidance, patched fences, and set new signs that read in bold, "Private property, no trespassing." I filed my own complaints and gave my collected evidence to the county. I let the process run, because the mess had become bigger than petty revenge. It had revealed a rot in the way people decide what's for the community. Sometimes, late at night when the farm was quiet again, I'd sit on the porch and stare at the place where the tents had been. The memory of the smell still stung. The taste of satisfaction was complicated now, laced with a remorse that didn't go away. Justice had a cost. I had to live with that price. I had defended the land my family had worked for, yes, but at what human cost? I couldn't pretend there wasn't weight to that question. Karen was a cautionary tale after that, humiliated, fined, and stripped of the trust she'd exploited. The HOA reeled. Some members resigned, others pledged to change. People told me I'd been brave. Some called me a vigilante. Both were true in different lights. I'd broken the momentum of a slow, quiet theft, but I'd also made sure it was messy and unforgettable. The farm eventually settled back into its old rhythms. The soil healed where footprints had pounded it flat, and the chickens slowly forgot the sound of strangers' laughter. And me, I learned that guarding what you love sometimes means standing in the mud, making hard choices, and swallowing the taste of victory when it's bitter. When the dust and the stink finally settled, I thought I'd feel nothing but triumph. I imagined walking across the field, chest puffed out, knowing I had finally silenced Karen's smug voice. But victory, as I quickly learned, doesn't always feel clean. The morning after the flood, my farm was eerily quiet. No tents, no smoke, no shrill laughter, just ruined grass scraps of nylon, and the sour smell that lingered even after the sewage drained into the ditches. Chickens cautiously emerged from the coop, pecking at the mess as though to confirm the invaders were gone. My cows, restless for days, finally lay in the pasture again, tails swishing lazily. Peace had returned, but it was a bruised, fragile peace. I walked the field with heavy boots crunching on discarded beer cans, staring at fire pits scarred into the soil. Every step reminded me that yes, I had won, but also that the battle had scarred my land. My land was alive, and I'd forced it to become a weapon. The victory had been necessary, but it had not been free. Karen, of course, didn't vanish quietly. That afternoon, she stormed onto the property line with 2 HOA board members in tow, her hair-frizzed clothes still stained from the fiasco. She pointed at me like she was Moses delivering commandments. "You'll pay for this," she shrieked. "This is vandalism, sabotage, terrorism. We'll sue you into the ground." I just stood there, leaning on my fence post, calm as a stone. Sue me with what, Karen? Your reputation, your board's imaginary paperwork. The sheriff already saw what happened. So did the county inspectors. And so did the cameras. Your own people were waving around while they slipped in the muck. One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. The other muttered something about needing to review liability. I could already see it, their loyalty to Karen evaporating like rain on hot asphalt. They weren't leaders. They were followers, and she was no longer someone worth following. Within a week, the fallout was everywhere. Local news ran the footage under the headline, "HOA Festival Ends in Sewage Nightmare." Clips went viral, Karen screaming, kids wailing, tents collapsing. Comment sections were merciless. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. That's what you get for trespassing. Why does every HOA have a Karen? The county fined the HOA thousands of dollars for health violations, improper use of land, and false filing of permits. The board, under pressure, forced Karen to step down as president. At the next meeting, neighbors shouted her down when she tried to defend herself. Someone even slapped a sticky note on her chair that read "Queen of Crap." She avoided me in public after that, but every now and then I'd catch her glare from across the grocery store aisle, her cart piled with organic kale, as if clinging to appearances would save her. But the fire in her eyes had dimmed. She wasn't untouchable anymore. She wasn't feared. She was pitied and mocked. The farm healed slower than Karen's reputation crumbled. With the help of a few decent neighbors, folks who admitted they'd been duped by her charm, I reseeded the damaged fields, patched the irrigation lines, and rebuilt the fences. One neighbor even brought over his teenage son every weekend for a month to help clean up, muttering apologies as they hauled off the garbage. I didn't forgive easily, but I respected effort. The strangest part was how quickly people turned on the HOA as a whole. For years, they'd tolerated Karen's overreach fines for lawn heights, threats about paint colors, demands for dues. Now, after watching her fall, they started asking questions they should have asked long ago. Why were they paying so much? Why were they letting one woman dictate every aspect of their lives? I heard rumblings of petitions, of splinter groups, forming even of folks planning to move just to escape HOA tyranny. Maybe Karen hadn't just destroyed her own reputation, maybe she'd planted the seed of rebellion that would topple the whole thing. As for me, I settled back into the rhythm of farm life. Morning chores, evening sunsets, the quiet dignity of knowing the land was mine again. But something inside me had changed. I wasn't the same man who let things slide, who trusted that reason would prevail. I had seen how fragile rights can be when bullies shout loud enough. I had learned that sometimes you can't wait for the sheriff or the county or the courts. Sometimes you have to stand up even if your methods aren't pretty, even if the cost is high. One evening, I sat on my porch as the sun dipped low, painting the fields gold. A friend from town stopped by, leaned on the railing, and said, "Heard you gave them a taste of their own medicine." I didn't answer right away. I just looked out over the land, breathing in the smell of fresh hay, and finally said no. I gave them a taste of consequences. Because that's what it really was. Not vengeance, not spite, consequences. For trespassing. For arrogance. For thinking one woman's ego was bigger than another man's legacy. Karen learned the hard way that when you mess with someone's home, you're not just poking at property lines. You're poking at history, pride, and survival. And sometimes those things bite back. The farm is quiet now, the kind of quiet that hums with resilience. And if anyone ever asks me what happened, I just smile and say, play stupid games, win sewage prizes. If there's one truth I took from all this, it's that boundaries matter. Not just fences or property lines, but personal boundaries, the lines you draw around your dignity, your work, your heritage. When people cross those lines without respect, you have a choice. You can let them keep walking, or you can stand firm. And standing firm doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. We live in a world where bullies thrive on intimidation and manipulation, where loud voices drown out reason. But loud isn't the same as right. And when you let someone trample your boundaries once, they'll keep doing it until there's nothing left. The lesson: don't wait for permission to defend what's yours. Don't wait for a committee to validate your worth. Stand tall, even if you stand alone. I'll admit my way wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean or noble, but it was effective. And more importantly, it reminded me and everyone watching that arrogance has a cost. Karen thought she could rewrite history and ownership with a whistle and a clipboard. Instead, she ended up rewriting her own story from queen bee to cautionary tale. So, if you're facing your own Karen, remember you're not powerless. Your voice matters, your story matters, and your boundaries matter. Defend them. And before you click away, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever faced a Karen of your own. And of course, hit subscribe, because trust me, there are plenty more HOA stories where this came from.